Menace at the Dam. One item that dominated the thoughts and actions of the Transformers, Autobots, and Decepticons was the eternal search for new energy sources. Without the new energy, it would be impossible for them ever to return to their own planet, Cybertron. But their approach to this problem differed greatly. The Autobots recognized the possible resources on our planet and wished to utilize them, and at the same time donate any of their scientific findings to the inhabitants of this planet, to be used for their benefit. The Autobots wished to return to Cybertron, leaving Earth a better place for their visit. On the other hand, the Decepticons were only interested in exploiting Earth resources, and did not care about the people here in any way at all. In fact, they were perfectly content to cause havoc and destruction, as long as they, the Decepticons, could benefit. And so, even while the two robot races were searching Earth for energy, they also continued hostilities and continued the war between themselves. It was the Decepticons who first started to wonder if perhaps they could derive the energy they required from water. One of their patrols, under their air commander Starscream, had been flying high over the Scranner range of mountains. There they had seen the great Stanley Lake perched high up in the peaks. They had noticed, too, that this great spread of water narrowed at one end, and there buildings were constructed, and a massive barrier had been built. Below this barrier, the land fell away deep into the valley below. Only a steady stream of water flowed from the lake through the barrier, forming a cascade shimmering in the sunlight as it sprayed downward. Starscream had reported all this to Megatron. Megatron called some of his principal aides around him. "Has anyone any idea what this may be?" he asked. Ravage answered, "It's a hydroelectric power station." This somewhat surprised his fellow Decepticons, because Ravage generally remained aloof from the rest of them. "What's a hydroelectric power station?" inquired Skywarp. "Someone tell him," Ravage said sarcastically. There was silence, and Megatron looked angry. He felt that Ravage was making a fool of him. "You tell us, Ravage," he snapped. "You seem to know all about it." Ravage said quietly, "A hydroelectric power station generates electricity using the energy of falling water. The water turns a turbine connected to an alternator. It's a very simple method of creating power, which if you knew your history you would remember we once used on Cybertron, way back in the mists of time, when we were not much more advanced in scientific matters than these stupid Earth people are here now." Megatron said, "Then if it is as outdated as all that, it won't be any use to us." Ravage replied, "Probably not, but although it is old-fashioned, it is quite efficient. It sounds from Starscream's report as if this power station could have an output of some 10,000 megawatts. "Might be worth investigating," Skywarp commented. "We might be able to adapt it in some way." Megatron felt he was losing command of the situation a bit, and was anxious to assert his authority. "In any case, I wish eventually to command all Earth resources," he said. "I, too, now can vaguely remember reading something about these hydroelectric methods in Cybertron history books. At least we will go and look at the place. Ravage, Rumble, Skywarp, Starscream, Soundwave, come with me. Laserbeak and the others stay here at the fortress and keep guard." And so the 5 Decepticons, under their ruthless leader, set off toward Stanley Lake. But their departure did not escape unnoticed. Having had recent experience of the Decepticons' cold-blooded behavior pattern, particularly towards the inhabitants of Earth, Optimus Prime had placed a secret 24-hour surveillance on the Decepticon headquarters. It was a perilous task, particularly because of the abilities of some of their adversaries. Soundwave's incredible hearing process, and Ravage's craft in the darkness of the night, for example, ensured that any Autobot on surveillance duty had to take great care. Bumblebee, Cliffjumper, Windcharger, and Beachcomber had been the main team with the responsibility, and had meticulously reported on all the Decepticons' comings and goings, not without some narrow escapes. Once The crafty Laserbeak had passed within a few feet of Cliffjumper, and Beachcomber had very nearly been detected by Skywarp. Fortunately, Beachcomber had, by just staying completely immobile for a long time, fooled the Decepticon warrior, who was more famed for his cruelty than his intelligence. But it was Windcharger who had been on duty when Megatron had set off for Stanley Lake with his 5 fellow Decepticons. He reported to Optimus Prime immediately. The Autobots' leader's reaction was instantaneous. "I don't like it," he said thoughtfully. "I would like to know where those 6 rogues are going and why. Certainly they will be up to no good, whatever it is." "What do you suggest we do?" asked Sideswipe. "I'd feel happier if we followed them and kept an eye on them." The leader answered thoughtfully. "What do you think, Prowl?" Prowl was the Autobots' military strategist. He always acted on the premise that logic was the ultimate weapon. "Well," he stated, 6 of their leaders are going on this specific venture. That must certainly mean that the Decepticons won't be making any direct attacks on us while their commanders are absent, so we needn't worry too much about some of us leaving here. It also follows that Megatron does not think we know about their absence, because they know their fortress is more vulnerable to any attack from us when they are not there. Thus, we have a choice. Take advantage of their absence and attack the remaining Decepticons, or follow the 6 leaders and find out what they are up to. I favor the latter course." Optimus Prime replied, "Right, that's the course we shall take. They obviously haven't got very far. Windcharger has given us their general direction. I'm sure we can pick up their trail without being spotted by them. Huffer, Windcharger, Sunstreaker, Sideswipe, and Jazz, let's go." And so the 6 of them set off. Huffer had a little grumble, but then it would not have been Huffer if he had not groaned a bit. Meanwhile, the Decepticons made their way to the mountains, completely unaware that their arch-enemies were following them. Guided by Starscream, they transformed and headed for the mountains, and were soon at the very edge of Stanley Lake. But it was now that the Autobots' close link with the Earth people came into effect. A number of physicists and people who realized the gravity and importance of the Transformers' presence on this planet were in continual radio contact with the Autobots, reporting any sightings or problems caused by the Decepticons. The great mass of the population had no idea of the lurking menace of the Decepticons. Those who did knew that the only hope for peace lay with the Autobots. They were also in constant contact with Optimus Prime in his race. The 6 Autobots had only just started off to follow the Decepticons when they received a radio message that the Decepticons had been sighted at the Scranner Range of mountains. The Autobots headed as quickly as possible in that direction. Soon another radio call came through that the Decepticons had been sighted near the great dam at the Stanley Lake Hydroelectric Power Station. Jazz, with his deep knowledge of all matters relating to Earth, quickly outlined what this news indicated. "They must believe the ancient method of making hydroelectric power can be of use to them," Jazz commented. "And who knows," Optimus Prime rejoined. "They may be right. Remember what Bumblebee always says, the least likely can be the most dangerous." How often back on Cybertron we used to find the old-fashioned simplistic method solved a contemporary problem. It was not long before the Autobots reached the shores of Stanley Lake, but the Decepticons had already made certain decisions. Megatron, fully in command, said, "We will go into the buildings and make the stupid Earth people tell us just what the capabilities of this place are. Frankly, I cannot see that it will serve our purpose, but at least now we are here, we can investigate fully." Suddenly, they all heard a noise from just nearby, a sound like a high-powered motorbike. Every Decepticon turned, ready for action. "Sounds like an Autobot," snapped Rumble. "They can't know we are here," said Megatron. "What is it then?" demanded Starscream. "I can hear another sound, too," said Soundwave, whose hearing talent far surpassed the others. Then he called, "Come out, you idiot! That's not funny!" It dawned on Megatron first. "It's Skywarp again, playing his foolish pranks." Then, very angry, he called, "Skywarp! Come here this instant before you are disciplined in such a way that you will wish you were back on Cybertron." Skywarp came out from the nearby bushes. "Just testing you all, just testing," he joked. Skywarp was the sneakiest of all the Decepticons. The stupid jokes he would play on his fellow Decepticons made him unpopular amongst all of them. Indeed, if it weren't for his incredible ability to travel at 1,500 miles per hour and teleport up to 2.5 miles and use his heat-seeking missiles, he would never have been tolerated. His fellow Decepticons were not amused.
"You do that once more, and you will wish the Autobots were here to save you,"
hissed Megatron. He was very, very angry.
"If I had been an Autobot, I could have destroyed half of you before you knew what was happening,"
sneered Skywarp. No one replied. They knew it was true. They had all been so intensely concentrating on the power station, they had dropped their guard. Megatron tried to hide his obvious annoyance.
"Come on,"
he snapped.
"Let's go."
So the Decepticons headed toward the section housing the powerful turbines. The construction of Stanley Lake Hydroelectric Power Station had taken 10 years. The huge, towering dam at the narrow end held back millions of gallons of lake water, which was released, when required, down into the valley below. It was considered a masterpiece of engineering. It was also an area of extreme beauty. The almost transparent water reflected the tall, proud trees along its bank. Wildlife abounded in a serene atmosphere of tranquility. But all this meant nothing to the Decepticons as they marched towards the buildings. Skywarp kicked in the door, and they all went into the main office. 3 startled engineers stared with incredulous astonishment at the terrifying sight of the menacing robots. Before they could utter a word, Megatron snarled,
"Show us how this thing works."
The eldest engineer, obviously in charge, stood up, frightened but courageous.
"Who are you? How dare you come in here like this?" "Throw him out," snapped Megatron. "Rumble, throw him in the lake."
Rumble, always anxious to please his leader, grabbed the man roughly and tossed him through the window. They all heard the splash as he went into the cold water. Megatron turned to the other engineers, now standing terrified and almost hypnotized by what was happening.
"Show us how this thing works,"
he snarled again. As if in a dream, the engineers led the Decepticons into the huge turbine rooms, and above the hum of machinery, answered the questions put to them. Meanwhile, the senior engineer had managed to swim to the far side of the lake, where he lay dazed and drying and warming himself under the bright mountain sun. He was puzzled, frightened, and apprehensive of the alien beings who had stormed into the power station. Who were they? What did they want? He had heard rumors during his last visit to the city that peculiar robots had been sighted in places like Oregon and Utah, but no one had taken the report seriously. He heard a slight sound behind him, and turned and gasped.
"Oh no, robots! Not you again! What do you want?"
He turned pale with fear. But the robot which answered him had a less harsh voice than those he had encountered earlier. It was, in fact, Jazz who spoke.
"How do you mean, Earthman, again? We haven't met before. There's no need to be frightened. We shall not harm you."
The engineer was both relieved and puzzled. He looked up at Jazz.
"About 10 minutes ago, 6 robots in the power station, threatening, demanding to know how it works. I dared challenge them, and they tossed me into the lake like an unwanted cork."
Optimus Prime stepped forward and said grimly,
"The Decepticons."
Then, seeing the puzzled expression on the engineer's face, he explained who the Decepticons were, how they, the Autobots, were friendly to Earth, and why and how they came to be here at Stanley Lake. The engineer was, for the moment, relieved. Then,
"But what will they do, these enemies of yours and ours? They could do immense damage to the dam and my poor colleagues inside. What has happened to them?"
Optimus Prime spoke seriously.
"First of all, we have got to get the Decepticons into the open. Then we shall have to have some plan to drive them away from here." He turned to the engineer. "Quickly, tell me about the power and energy available here."
The engineer reported the required facts and figures, and then Optimus said,
"I cannot see that this form of power can help us in any way, and as soon as the Decepticons realize the same thing—"
Huffer voiced the thoughts of them all.
"So what damage will they do when they realize they've come on a fruitless visit?"
Everyone was quiet. Then Optimus Prime turned to Prowl.
What are your views?
Prowl said,
The Decepticons don't know we are here.
When they do find out, they won't know how many of us there are. We know exactly which ones of them are here. These are plus factors. The minus factors are that Ravage, their saboteur, is there, and also that demolition punk, Rumble. They are sure to want to show off. So the damage they will do could be devastating. Our only chance is to draw them out and to join combat. Optimus Prime was grim.
Right. Jazz, you stay with the Earth people in the power station, while we take on the enemy outside.
Jazz agreed to do this, and Optimus continued,
When we have them outside, take this Earthman with you back into the buildings. Apart from protecting them all, you'll have a good view of the proceedings.
Then Prowl said, We must try and ensure the battle takes place in the valley. There will be less likelihood of doing serious damage down there. Optimus agreed, and leaving Jazz with the engineer, they all went down the steep mountainside into the valley below. Once there, Optimus said quietly, Just one thing, Autobots. If I give the order to retreat, obey instantly. Instantly. I want that promise. You see, if we can get the Decepticons away, it will be safer for the Earth people. Oh, and if we do retreat, we will meet up there, up on that peak. And he pointed toward a nearby mountaintop. Right now, Sideswipe, fire some of your flares and let them know we are here. Sideswipe obeyed, and there was a bright flash which the Decepticons could not fail to miss. In the power station, the Decepticons looked at each other in astonishment.
Autobots!
Screamed Megatron.
That's a Sideswipe flare!
He pointed down into the valley.
Look, down there! 5 of them!
How did they get there? Soundwave asked. Megatron turned to him.
How do I know? But we shall attack them. Decepticons, outside of here and transform. We muster below and prepare for combat.
And so, while the battle raged down below, Jazz went back into the power station to join the terrified engineers. The view from the top of the dam was terrifying and spectacular, each race of Transformers using all their firepower and at the same time using their special defense mechanisms. No ordinary living creature would have lasted for 1 second. Only the Transformers with their special features could survive, and some of them were being hurt. Sideswipe had acted a little rashly and felt the power of Soundwave's blaster gun, and Optimus Prime had shaken Starscream with his artillery. But neither side seemed to be gaining, until, unexpectedly, Optimus Prime ordered the retreat. Within seconds, the Decepticons found themselves alone in the valley and stopped firing. They were pleased with themselves. Megatron spoke for them all.
We may not have destroyed any of them, but we have hurt some and frightened them all.
He looked with pride at his swaggering warriors. Then, suddenly, Soundwave shouted, "What's that noise?" And before any of them could move, a spectacular, spewing, flowing, gigantic wall of water hit them from above. So fierce was its power that every Decepticon was bowled over by it. Utterly helpless, they were swept along the bed of the valley, a clattering, scrambling team of robots, now rendered completely powerless as they uselessly tried to escape from the roaring torrent. And as they were being swept away into the distance, Jazz and the engineers were celebrating above. Optimus and Jazz had made this provisional plan that if it was possible to maneuver the Decepticons into position and the Autobots could get out of the way, Jazz and the engineers would open the great sluice gates of the dam. But abruptly, their celebration stopped. Ravage was standing in the doorway. Unlike the others, he had managed to avoid the torrent, and now with his sabotage equipment of 2 photon bombs, he stood menacing and threatening. Jazz dared not fire his own photon rifle for fear of causing catastrophic damage to the power station and those in it. He knew the craft and deadliness of Ravage, but he also knew Ravage's one weakness. To the utter astonishment of the engineers, Jazz turned on his dazzling, blinding, disorienting light show. Ravage stopped dead in his tracks, confused, temporarily sightless, his sensitivity to light completely impairing his faculties. Then the other Autobots joined Jazz and the engineers. Every one of them pointed their weapons at Ravage. Optimus Prime spoke menacingly. "Ravage, if you don't leave this place now, you will be instantly destroyed. 6 of us against you. Get out of here and back to your damp Decepticon friends." Then he shouted, "Go!
Now!
So Ravage went, and, knowing he was defeated, slunk away back to the fortress. And while the engineers closed down the sluices, the Autobots decided the energy supply was not that which the Transformers required. But Jazz, all lights dimmed by now, gazed with admiration at the beauty of the Stanley Lake.